Welcome back to another episode of Insects for Fun. I stepped away from the mic for close to a month because I had family visiting me in Japan, and towards the end of their visit, I got a gnarly sinus infection, which I am still trying to get to the root of. But hey, at least I can hear out of my right ear again. Today is a special episode with a conversation between myself and renowned entomologist Barrett Klein, author for an incredible book titled The Insect Epiphony, which is available now. I cannot recommend it enough for listeners of this show because it covers everything listeners of this show love about this podcast, written beautifully into a 372-page book. Now, before I jump into our conversation, I just want to mention that you can get the entire conversation plus video of this, along with bonus episodes, ad-free episodes, and vlogs over on patreon.com/insects for fun. All right, let's get into it. Oh, there you go. Yes, I really wanted to talk to you about this book that you just released, The Insect Epiphony. It's great. I've been reading through it, and it just the scope. I really can't recommend it enough to people who are interested in entomology, not only from like an evolutionary and phylogenetic background, but like the amount of information and cultural stuff you provide from an anthropological perspective. Like it really just covers everything, which is super awesome. It's super great.
It was so much fun to write because I'm diving down rabbit holes, learning every page, every day, new stories. Because, I mean, insects, endless stories, not only in terms of their biology, behavior, physiology, evolution, however you want to look at insects, but their cultural connections throughout our history and across the world. And so that's what I've just have had the best time exploring.
It's like both, and you mentioned too in your book, like you can't avoid spiders as well, because spiders have such huge cultural importance through different. I mean, my last episode before this was about Joro spiders. Now, I'm sure you must be familiar with Joro spiders, right? Yes. Yeah. They're making their way through the United States. But Joro spiders, they got their name, like they have this very old legend in Japan about a spider a woman who's actually like a spider, like this mythological creature, and she lures men in only to eat them. And yes, it's super cool. It's super cool. Yeah. And Joro spiders have been a huge prominent piece of Japanese culture for such a long time, just because they've been here like forever. So yeah, I mean, there's so
some
much.
Of my favorite myths, textiles, all manner of literature comes out of Japan. The Japanese love of insects is deep, profound. And
you can't read a haiku, I think, for the most part, without having some
a dragonfly, a cricket, or
some kind of small insect-related thing to tie in what season the haiku is being written in, and all that kind of stuff.
A huge one is crickets and cricket song, raising crickets, either to battle or to entertain through song. And
you can buy bell crickets at pet stores here when the season is right. Yeah, you can even go to home centers. You can go to home centers in Japan and purchase beetles and bell crickets. And they have them like divided too between like female and male, so you can breed them if you want, or you can keep them separate.
I wonder if I'm living in the wrong country.
Yeah, that's
Well, I've got my work cut out for me. I've got to spread the entomophilia across the United States.
Yes, you have to be one of the agents to
yes, that's right.
Change the mindset,
disseminate
of the
good
Western
word
piece.
of the hexapods.
Yes, we have to the good fight for the hexapods. Arthropods, yeah, exactly.
So what have you found to be the most exciting, interesting surprise cultural insect connection since you've been in Japan?
Ooh. I think something that I found super interesting, which I didn't realize before, was that throughout, because I'm like nerdy when it comes to like Japanese stuff. I love the video games, I love the manga and all of that stuff.
Oh yeah,
and I had no idea that insects they have like superhero insects. Like there's kind of like an Ultraman version of like a stag beetle. And then they also had this whole video game franchise, which I completely missed, called Mushi King. And the whole thing was to, collect beetles and battle them in arcade machines. But they were also had trading cards, and there's also like a comic book based on this. And what I love is that you can go into like any like bookstore here, and you can go into any even like just general stores, and they have entomology stuff like right there. And none of it is portrayed in a scary and negative way. It's all incredibly informational, and it's all like, they treat it. It's like it's perfect for somebody who's super into collecting and learning more, because they give you like all of these images, and they go into super like detail, even covering like the textures, all of the insects, right? Like how you can tell the difference between some of them that are maybe harder to tell. Like here's an example of a book that a student gave me. Depth that goes into these is incredible. And what I also love is that all of these tell you like the ethical ways to raise them and house them as pets, and
brilliant.
Yeah, I mean,
Since
it's amazing.
We're talking about the
do.
Japanese connection, mind if I share a few examples that I include in the book?
Yes, please.
Some of my favorite artists who collaborate with insects include Kazuo Katanaga. And Kazuo Katanaga has long worked with silkworm moths, Bombyx mori, the domesticated silkworm moth.
Yep.
And he'll create these vast works. He's interested in the product. So he'll work with wood, he'll work with glass, he'll work with silk. And so part of his art is participation in the process. So you can witness the Bombyx mori building these massive silkscapes. Another, Yukinori Yanagi, produces ant farm ant flags. So in his monumental world flag ant farm piece, where he had all the UN flags in beautifully meticulous laid out colored sands, the flags and sands are connected from behind with Pagana myrmex harvester ants, and who disperse the sands, breaking down the arbitrary political boundaries. Another, in the beautiful Jizai okimono, which is the cultural tradition of replicating either fantastical or real animals in articulated metal. There is a marvelous individual, Haruo Mitsuo, who is carrying on this tradition, producing some of the most exquisite beetles and other insects, totally out of metal, articulated, can spread the wings and everything. And then another who I feature is Noriyuki Saito, and he produces his insects out of bamboo, really exquisitely. And then it's hard not to mention Kobo Abe, the author of Woman in the Dunes, and the film, Teshi Gahara's film, Woman of the Dunes, which features an entomologist who gets trapped as if he were an ant in a myrmeleonted antlion conical pit.
Ooh,
it's a zinger. It's a zinger.
That's not good.
But highly recommended.
Yeah. It's super interesting. That's super cool. Yeah. Bamboo is such an interesting thing to work with. You don't realize how durable it is, even at like a finite scale, until you really start seeing the creations that people like make. I mean, the baskets, just everything, because you can really just get it down to these fine fibers that are almost like horse hairs, and you can just do so much with it. So it's not surprising the amount of intricacy that they can get with sculpting like insect models based purely off bamboo. It's incredible.
And then on the flip side, making other things out of insect parts. So insect products or parts. And some of the really eye-opening artifacts that I was exposed to, for example, in the anthropology collection at the Field Museum in Chicago, these curators would pull out, for example, necklaces, tucum fiber holding what? Leg segments of ants. Just all in a row, glistening brown leg segments of ants.
Wow.
Or of iridescent green beetle leg segments. Really phenomenal.
Yeah. I mean, the beetles, like I know people use, jewel beetles. For
a great
for
example.
So many things.
Jan Fabre, the artist with 29 helpers, coated the ceiling of the Royal Palace in Brussels, Belgium, with 1 million elytra, the sheath-like forewings of buprested metallic boring beetles. So they glisten permanently because of the structural color, not pigment-based color, for eternity.
For eternity. And you have to think, like, you got to...
hold up.
Right. As long as nothing happens to the palace. But, and I just picturing... just looking up at that, I mean, because the pigmentation in the elytra buprestids, there's so many colors in those things, and like they change based on which direction you're looking from. So I can just only imagine, like looking at a ceiling of that, it's just like seeing maybe like a Milky Way or something. Like it just like sparkles, and you see all these different patterns.
Exactly. The beauty is like a peacock's feather with those false eyes. It's all iridescent, so it's all structural. The way the light refracts through will change. The hue will change as you change your angle of view.
Yep. So you can see many different things.
So people have been incorporating, especially beetle parts, but also butterfly wings in jewelry and all manner of wearable art, as well as art across the world.
Yeah, that's so awesome.
You want to see one of my wearable art pieces?
Oh, I think
You ready?
Yes,
you
actually,
ready?
Yes, please.
Okay, hold on. Dun, dun, dun.
There it is. I love that. That's so awesome. That's so cool.
So that's
so good.
I took a recycled bicycle helmet, covered it in beeswax, put it in a hive, and they started building their gorgeous architecture all over it. And then I just added paper mache below. So beeswax above, paper mache below.
It's so nice. It's super cool. And I wanted to ask you actually, because like I've looked through your art collection. I've seen quite a bit of the stuff that you've done. And I also know that you were also like hired to, make models and stuff for the Museum of Natural History, correct?
That's right.
Stuff like that. So, but I've noticed like there's kind of this split in your work. Like you have these super realistic models that are incredible and that are featured in, you know, these museums. But then you also have this more kind of fun, cartoony side of things.
More
That's more
serious
imaginative.
bee helmets.
Yes. Yeah, the bee helmets is way more important than the small model of the beetle.
That's right. Actually, right now at this very moment, I'm making, maybe you can see it, paper mache. So I'm making this year's Halloween mask, and I can't tell you what it is yet, but let's just say it'll feature some paper wasp nest paper.
Amazing. Yeah, no, my father actually loves making big sculptures with paper mache and chicken wire, and both my parents are artists, so they both do.
That's fantastic.
So I've been surrounded by this kind of stuff my entire life, so it's really cool.
Madness for you.
It's great though. So I love the way that you're incorporating entomology, like different aspects of insects, like not just as a base of inspiration, but you're actually using the insects in some of these pieces as well to help you build and craft them.
And honestly, when I'm teaching classes like not just scientific visualization, but entomology, animal behavior, and other classes at my university, I always include illustration. And one of the big reasons for including some form of artistic representation is that you observe your subjects better. You really get to know them better. It's one thing looking through a microscope or looking at them in the field or snapping a photo. And it's another thing entirely trying to draw one yourself. You get to know every feature, nook and cranny. Yes. And so my students are all learning about their subjects far more deeply just by spending the time with that organism.
So are you having your students literally draw these insects?
Oh, yeah.
As part of that. Okay. Yes.
That's right.
Great. Cool.
So we do scientific illustrations in the scientific visualization class, and we draw our interpretations of behavior in animals and animal behavior. Different projects, different assignments lend credence or show importance of, for example, including imagery in published science. So, for example, if you're flipping through an article in a peer-reviewed published journal article and there are no visuals, it's a little bit harder for a visually oriented species like Homo sapiens to grasp it. Especially when you're looking at, for example, the methods section and you want to be able to understand and replicate the science. I want to see what happened, what your organisms look like if you're studying organisms.
Have personally struggled with that during like in graduate school when I was having to read through so many different research articles and trying to figure out how these people actually did things. It's if there's no visual representation, I have to like reread the passage so many times just to spatially orient it in my mind to figure out what actually happened. I mean, I have I have the same issue with cooking. Because
actually, that's a really good point. So if you've got the recipe and the instructions without the visuals, I could see that being as difficult as building furniture without visuals in your instruction guide.
It's very difficult because you're like, okay, well, like what does a pinch mean? What is any of this? Like, what are you actually doing? It's just
I mean, a pinch from a giant's, index finger and thumb is different than
like whose hand wrote this recipe, right? Just a handful of.
Yeah, so just like, I mean, with the helmets or with the models, while I'm incorporating science or incorporating insects in the art, similarly, artists can really benefit from knowing insects better or their natural subjects, their biological subjects better. So, for example, you look at the first issues of Spider-Man. Here's Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's Spider-Man. How did Steve Ditko draw the spider? Those 8 legs are popping out of the opisthozoa, the back body, instead of the prosoma, the front body. Like, come on.
Get it right, man.
Yeah, that's right. Just look at your organism just for a few seconds. Find the inspiration from the source.
Yes. No,
I've got a big collection of insects in stamps and comic books, on currency, and sometimes it's right, sometimes it's not right.
Sometimes it's not.
I have no data to back this up, but I feel like more often than not, a depiction of a honeybee on a billboard, an advertisement, tends more often to be a syrphid hoverfly bee mimic than a honeybee. I even own a book about the history of honey production, and who's on the cover and on the spine? A big hoverfly. A different order of insect.
Yes.
Different number of wings, different antennae, mouth parts, eyes, from head to tarsus.
Completely different organism.
So, I mean, this is a
I'll
big
have to
lesson.
Look out for this now, yeah.
A big lesson for your listeners, viewers, just paying attention, really observing. And through observing organisms, you can empathize, you can feel for them better, maybe understand them a little bit better, begin to appreciate, love them more.
Yeah, I did a whole episode on the cabbage whites.
Oh, yeah. Was it
because I feel like cabbage whites, well, that's the thing, right? Because there's so many, and let's see, which I did a broad, Pieris, yep.
Okay.
The family Piridae. It's just like there's so. I did a whole thing about how these butterflies are overlooked largely. They're largely overlooked by many people because we just kind of see them everywhere. And Piridae in general, they just, it's just like, if you see one, you think you've seen all of them, kind of, because they're not super flashy like the swallowtails or the other things. Right. It's just kind of you see one and you think, oh, it's another cabbage white, but it's kind of yellow. Oh, it's a yellow cabbage white.
It's funny, the idea of paying attention and learning and appreciating more. I'll admit that early on, when I'm thinking about insects, I would gravitate toward the less popular. And so I didn't pay much attention to Lepidoptera. And then David Wagner gave this stellar talk about not just moths, but caterpillars. And it blew me away. The behavior of caterpillars, diversity of caterpillars, totally blew me away. And so
they're amazing. So I've been the opposite. I've always been more interested in caterpillars, like since I was a kid, because so I've always been out collecting. That's like the first thing I see usually is like a caterpillar. And then I'm like, ooh, like this looks really interesting. I wonder what this is going to turn into. And then I would always raise them up to see like what the final form was, because it's like a mystery box, You find
like a
something,
Dan Jansen, raising them just to see what comes of them.
I just raised them to see.
That reminds me of yet another artist who I feature in the book from Japan, Aki Inomata. And what she does is she looks at cycad moth or bagworm moth caterpillars. And apparently, I just learned this recently, a childhood tradition in Japan is to offer bagworm moths little colored pieces of paper. and they'll make, if you hit it at the right time, they'll build their cocoon or their bagworm out of the paper. What she does is she takes little snippets of high fashion, like she'll clip off of dresses, offer that to the Psychic moths, and they produce their own little beautiful fashion statements.
Yes. No, it's incredible. Yeah, bagworms are definitely a big part of Japan for sure. You see them in a lot of cartoons and a lot of illustrations and
in
stuff
cartoons?
like that. Yeah, bagworms. They're just there. They're just hanging from trees, and and also bagworms are everywhere in this country, just like the Joro spiders. You cannot go anywhere without seeing the structure of a bagworm or like a Joyo spider somewhere.
And what is your impression of fireflies, lightning beetles in Japan? A beloved group of insects.
Fireflies. When I was in Totori, I would go to special places where you could witness two species of fireflies like overlapping. They fly at the same time. There's a special time. I believe it's right at the end of June and early July when one of the first comers they start to die off, and then the second fireflies start to emerge. And there's this point where they overlap, and I can't remember the Japanese translation. There's like the princess firefly, the like Hime Hotaru, which is like much smaller, and then you have the other one, which is like much larger, and they blink at different frequencies.
Oh, that's great. Species-specific bioluminescent calls.
Yes, correct.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And it's
a friend of mine, Joey Stein, designed a fake firefly. Actually, I think I'm wearing the T-shirt. Hey!
Oh, there it is.
Dun, dun. Coincidentally. So he designed a firefly machine that you could just light up or program to call in other fireflies.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So you can program it to call in different species. Like that's how it works.
That's right. Wow. Just this past a few months ago, this summer, fall, I pulled one out and I just blinked it and 3 male fireflies came in. So great. Speaking of overlapping species of insects, I went to Springfield, Illinois this summer to witness the overlap of the 2 periodical cicada species broods.
Yes.
And millions.
That was a big
cacophony
thing.
in the trees.
Yep.
It was so great.
That was a huge thing this summer.
Joseph Yun, the entomologist, the ambassador for eating of insects to the UN and NASA and other, he actually collected tons of them for haute cuisine. So providing dishes.
Lots of people love to cook with cicadas, for sure. I've seen a lot of dishes made with the cicadas. I personally have not eaten the cicada yet. I've had crickets. I've had silkworm pupae. I gotta say though, I like crickets more than the pupae.
I totally agree. They're the lowest on my list, sadly.
There's just something just didn't seem right when eating those.
Especially the canned ones. I can't recommend
not a fan of the canned ones. Nope. I believe that's what I had to, and I was like, I'm not digging this. I'd much rather have Orthoptera than this.
That's right. I went to a Korean restaurant just outside of Chicago, and I saw on the menu, insect pupae. I thought, what? Insect pupae? Out of nowhere. So I asked the server, so what is this all about? They just said insect pupae. And so they eventually called the manager. So I'm talking to the owner of the restaurant, and all they could say is insect pupae. And I thought,
you're trying to figure out what?
Moth pupae.
What?
And that's right. What? And from across the restaurant, in came this huge platter with just a pile of silkworm moth pupae.
Okay.
It was a long evening.
Yep. Satisfying.
Yeah, that's right. But micronutrients, protein, more sustainable than our vertebrate domesticated animals. So they're
for
positives.
sure. For sure. You know, you can get edible insects in vending machines here.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
Wow. A variety?
Yeah, they have like different kinds. Some of them are like larval stages, others are like adults. You find them periodically in a vending machines. Yep. You can just put your money in and you can get some insects.
Okay, what can't you get out of a vending machine in Japan?
That is a fantastic question, and I don't think I have an answer.
A kitchen sink, an automobile, a log cabin.
We're going to get
Sailboat.
there probably. It's like Dragon Ball. It's like Dragon Ball.
Love it.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah. These bigger things, a little difficult, but I'm sure
they just
Japan
have to grow those vending machines.
Right.
Bigger.
They have to grow the vending machines or they just have to shrink. People just have to get smaller.
Just add water.
Yeah, no, it's wild, the stuff that you can find in Japan. It's incredible. I do love the convenience of so many things here. Speaking of convenience, I found YouTube videos of like Japanese insect collectors, and they're like, cool. Light traps are expensive, but they don't have to be. You can go to like 100 yen store and build your own. So I built my own. I made like 2, and I built my own using like a laundry bag and like the metal like drying sheet and some zip ties with like a UV light. And you can just attach a mobile battery and you can just walk around. And literally the first night that I started doing this, I turned on the mobile battery and I was just walking, holding this, makeshift black light. And immediately out of the bushes flies Actius. Like they were just flying in. But of course it was only males. I was unable to get a female. But I mean, still it's really cool that really actually works. And I was also able to get the kabutomushi, the rhino beetles.
Oh, yeah.
The rhino beetles. That's a big thing in Japan. A lot of people love the rhino beetles more than, I don't know. I think it's like people have a preference.
Oh, that's
they
huge.
either like the rhino beetles or they like the stag beetles. Now, I personally am a stag beetle guy, but
I love both. They're
both super cool. They're both super cool. What I found in Japan is that there's a bigger variety. There's a noticeable more variety of stag beetles. And what I love about the stags is that the horns are all so different. Even within a single species, you can have like huge variations of horn structure based on what kind of male it is. So people are after those alphas, but even the other ones with the smaller horns are just as interesting because they're capitalizing.
Turn to page 187.
187, all right.
Yeah, because, there isn't a beetle example there, but 2 dragonflies and a cicada on samurai helmets. And the beetle examples are...
Yes, I saw that.
I love those.
Yes.
And the idea was really interesting to me because you'd have the samurai warrior gear that would have subtle effects. You'd have a sword hilt and other things that were insectal, right? And beautiful, gorgeous examples. And then during the Edo period, a time of peace, apparently the samurai helmets became more and more ceremonial and elaborate, and the insects became more and more outrageous. But part of that, the transition, as I understand it, one researcher wrote that the advent of guns and gun smoke elicited more elaborate displays in the field, and then less practical ones during the time of peace following. So really interesting transitions in terms of what you wear insect-wise.
Yes, that's super. I did not know that. I did not know that connection between like the really more elaborate like helmet structures and within the Edo period and the evolution of guns and stuff. Yeah. It's very interesting. I was going to ask you, do you know why kabuto mushi are called kabuto mushi, or like what the whole deal is with that?
Oh, I should know this. In fact, I did know this, and I think I've plumb forgotten. Can you enlighten?
That's what happens. So kabuto is helmet.
Yes.
So, right?
And so mushi the kabuto just means bug or insect, right?
Right. And so they call rhino beetles kabuto mushi because they have like the samurai, the helmet, right? It looks like they have that samurai helmet. Versus the stag beetles, they don't get the name. And what I've noticed in Japan, which is really interesting, is that the insect terms, like the terms that they give these insects, are kind of like vague.
Oh,
they're very vague. So people don't like when I say, like beetle, a lot of people there's like a disconnect that like kabuto mushi and stag beetles are like all within this same group of beetles. And like bees, for example, are called hachi in Japanese. But the problem is they also call wasps hachi. There's no divide. Wow. They're one and the same. And so you end up with these names like suzumebachi. Suzumebachi is like sparrow wasp. It's the giant Asian hornet, right? They call that suzumebachi. I think that's right. It might be suzumehachi, but I believe it's bachi.
And that's a Vespa?
Yes, it's Vespa. Vespa mandarinia.
Mandarinia. Okay. And this is the one that's recently been introduced to British Columbia and the United States. So they'll probably spread through the US.
Yeah. Well, actually, no, wait. I think this one, the Asian giant hornet, made its way to the US like a little while ago, but I believe we have successfully stopped it.
How long will that last?
I don't know. The other one that people are really worried about is the regular Asian hornet, not the giant Asian hornet. There's another one, and it's smaller. And what it does, just like the Asian giant hornet, is it kills honeybees and it kills all of these other insects. And that's the problem, right? Is that you get these things that make their way into an ecosystem where there's nothing to really stop them. And it's like, oh, what do we do? What do we do?
Going back to the question of why sometimes folk taxonomy is so vague. And that's, I won't say universal, but it's really common that you'll have these catch-all terms for organisms, even when they're used as food or medicinals, and even when I believe locals will be able to pinpoint and distinguish. So why these umbrella terms? So that there's where common names fail us, and why we've turned to and relied on Latinate binomial nomenclature, the scientific names, to say, all right, now someone from Malaysia can communicate with someone from Peru using one name
exactly about
for
what
species.
This is. Yes, because it's so important. It really is. like especially in these countries where there is a certain vagueness to it. I mean, I love the names that people give these insects in Japan. Like there's like bear bee, there's wasp, there's a sparrow bee, which is like a wasp. They have all these. There's literally like long-legged bee, like hashi nagashi bachi.
Oh, that's great.
They just add all of these, right? It's just hachi, right? The term for bee and wasp, and then they change it they just add different words to it to describe what it is that you see.
It's funny, before Carl Linnaeus introduced this binomial nomenclature with a genus and species epithet for the species name, Roman descriptions would be 12 words long. So all Latin that would describe, like a honeybee, like a Western honeybee, would have 12 words. Apis, grisio, blah, blah, blah. So hairy, blah, 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 blah. So you'd have the whole description in the name.
The whole description right there in the name. How can you miss it? You can't miss it if it's got the
That's right. So I like that example you gave that spells out the long-legged, da, 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 da.
Yes, they do that. And it's super cool because you think like, oh, like it's going to have some sort of special, unique name. And then you realize, oh no, a lot of the names are just descriptors of what you're looking at.
Helpful. I'll go with that.
It's super helpful. I'm like, whoa, this is way easier than I thought it was going to be.
That's right. That's better than something like Smithii, which is a species epithet for countless organisms, because Smith, is involved in some way.
Right.
But describing it, that's helpful.
Yes, it's very helpful. Yeah.
Love it.
Great. Now, I was going to say, so you are active at the University of Wisconsin now.
I'm at University of Wisconsin La Crosse in the driftless zone where the glaciers didn't flatten the area. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's got to be good for diversity.
Oh, yeah. It's great. In fact, one master's student of mine, Danielle Hudson, is studying solitary ground nesting species of bees and looking at which plants they pollinate. So she'll grab a bee and then brush off the pollen and then do a DNA sample of that pollen.
Check out what the pollen is. That's super cool. The
driftless zone is a unique area.
Yeah. What is your favorite?
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
Oh,
now I could narrow this down. I could narrow this down, right? I'll narrow this down.
Okay.
What is your what insect most interests you in this driftless zone?
Oh, that's helpful.
Of Wisconsin.
So we're narrowing it down a little bit because then I won't go in the direction of like fungus growing leafcutter ants and all these other rock crawlers and Mantopasmatodians and all these others. Well, still super difficult because it's so diverse. Now, sometimes I'm really surprised. I'm continually surprised when you've got these mass emergences of insects. So while I'm particularly intrigued by social insects and how they communicate with each other, there are solitary species that live or at least breed in aggregate. So, for example, every spring on our campus at University of Wisconsin La Crosse's campus, shebang, a couple of species by the 1,000 of solitary ground nesting bees emerge en masse. Now, they're solitary, so why in aggregate? And these are some of the questions we're trying to explore. So yeah, really fascinating. But then you could say, wow, I'm really interested in these bees to see how important they are as pollinators and how they behave in this way or that way. But then if you watch really closely, you'll see a genus of cuckoo bee that waits for a mother to leave a hole and then goes down, lays her own egg. So
nabs.
they are fascinating too.
Cuckoo bees are, that's a whole nother
But it's
thing.
Also cool to look at dung beetles and carrion beetles, burying beetles.
Yep.
I mean, list goes on.
I mean, even, stag beetles will kind of pull these underhanded tactics. Like I mentioned before, the males have different horn shapes and like sizes based on whether they're an alpha or a beta or somewhere in between. And the whole thing is that these alpha males are more aggressive, and they're also like a little bit more maybe dense, like headstrong. Like their whole thing is like, okay, I have my female and I'm going to guard and protect because I can. Like I have the power to do this. And then you have these other beetles that don't have the power, and they're sneaky, and they'll go in behind and they'll mate with the female and leave. And this big, strong male thinks that these offspring are his, but they're not.
Spot on.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens in, like, for example, Onthophagus dung beetles. And so Doug Emlin and other researchers in different labs in the US have been looking at the trade-off, the developmental trade-off. Do you have big eyes or do you have big horns, for example, to displace other males? And in the one case, say, for example, an elephant plops some dung. These Onthophagus beetles come in. Long-horned males will always beat short-horned males. So short-horned males, just as you're suggesting with stag beetles, have different strategies to get to the females.
Yeah.
So two long-horned males battle. The short-horned male sneaks down.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
He's just
short-horned male digs
away.
His own tunnel to intercept a female. Yeah. Crazy behaviors. Love them.
That's awesome.
So to pick a favorite, impossible, Mitch. But when we focus on, like, I'm interested in parasitism or hyperparasitism, I'm interested in how small you can get or how large you can get, or what is the weirdest form of communication behavior, then we can have some traction.
Okay. So I mean, parasitism, though, is also just like, there's so many parasitoids. And I've mentioned this before on my podcast many times, but no arthropod is safe from a parasitoid.
That's right. That is so right.
There's no
Here's a great example. Alexei Pololov in Russia studies these miniature, micro-miniature insects, the smallest insects on the planet. Figures out what they're lacking, how they can get by being so tiny. And in the case of one fairy fly, which is a Megaphragma wasp, they're so small, they lay eggs within the eggs of Socopteran bark lice. And to be that small, about 85% of the neurons in the brains don't even have nuclei, which means that they can't undergo mitosis, so you can't produce new cells, right? So they're stuck, they're short-lived. I mean, the males are so small that they're the width of your human hair or a page in that book.
It's crazy.
Love
so
it.
Small. I mean, I can't imagine working. I mean, I had to work with trichogramma. You're familiar with trichogramma,
there you go.
Right?
Super tiny. I once visited when I was applying as a master's student to the University of Arizona. A friend of mine, someone who became a friend, who was working in such a lab, working with these very tiny wasp parasitoids. I didn't know what he worked on, so I was talking with him about his research, and he said, I study wasps, and I do dissections, with these, I have to use these micro pins. And oh, look, there's a wasp loose in the lab. And I'm looking all around because I'd worked with Polistes paper wasps, big ones, right? And so he said, loose in the lab. And then I'm looking all, and he said, no, at the tip of my finger. And sure enough, there was a piece of dust that apparently was a wasp.
There you go.
He was working on a very different scale than I had.
Yeah. The smallest things that I've had to work with were trichogramma and scale insects.
Those can be pretty teeny.
Definitely the smallest. Now, the thing that I did with scale insects was super cool, actually. I was working in Ben Normark's lab at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst.
Yeah.
And I was basically creating slides of these scale insects from all around the world. And what you had to do was you had to clear them and KOH, I think potassium hydroxide to get, and then you had to gently squeeze the fatty lipids out of them, and you had to make sure. Oh, it's the eggs, the shell, the body.
So you were able to see the reduced legs and mouth parts.
Oh, there's not even. Yeah, you could see everything. I mean, these scale insects, you put them in the KOH and you squeeze out the lipids, and then they become this flat, clear shell. And you have to be real careful with how you're like picking them and moving them. I was using these super small spatulas, and you move them into a dye. And then it dies and it fills all the crevices of the body. And the only way to truly identify scale insects is by looking at their reproductive organs, because each species is slightly different. But like the body plan can look the same for a lot of these. But when you look at the reproductive organs, it's this like, it's crazy. It's so cool. And I was telling Ben, I was like, hey, you know, like, I'm sure I feel like I could make an art career off of this, where like you just you just take different scale insects and then you just blow them up on a canvas and you just do the same thing, because I feel like that's how artists get famous, right? They do one thing over and over and over again with slight variation. And I'm like, you know, nobody would know that this is a scale insect except for like people in entomology. And but
even if people did, I mean, that would probably add to the allure. I would love to see examples of your slides. I think that would be an exquisite display.
So incredible. They're so nice. It's so cool to look at them because it's just, and like they've got all of these super like small. I used to know all of the anatomical vocabulary. Now I don't, but I still have like a picture in my mind of what to look for. And
for your listeners, viewers, Mitch is taking on the least insectal insect on the planet and describing the anatomical features. I mean, for example,
this thing
in the Insect Epiphany, I talk about how the cochineal insect, the cochineal bug, the females are just these blobby things. And
they're just blobs.
Amy Butler Greenfield called cochineal bugs the perfect red, and she described how some would call it a worm, a berry, a worm berry.
Right.
Nobody knew what the females were. I mean, the Maya and Aztecs who had domesticated or reared them for millennia definitely knew. But when they were shipped across the ocean and the world was going crazy over this gorgeous organic source of red, they had no clue for a while.
Yeah, I mean it's amazing because like you said, these scale insects, it's the females that we have to identify. It's the females that we have to look at. It's not the males, and the males
versus these little winged males that you can say, okay, that's an insect.
Yes, the males. If you can actually look at a male long enough, you could to not think it's like a piece of dust in the wind, like you were saying. It's like, okay,
Right.
like, yes, that's an insect, versus like these females. People might just think, oh, it's just a growth on a tree. It's just a bump on a log.
Right.
It's
That's right.
it's you don't.
I mean, imagining being the first entrepreneurial human to look at like lac insects and say,
Yeah.
hey, I can use that secretion to paint on wood or coat some armor or coat an apple or coat, yeah.
How you would get to that point, I don't know. But that is, yeah, I was reading that in your book and I was like, yeah, it's like, it's crazy to think that, you know, so much of this stuff just comes from the excrement, the waxy buildup, secretions of of these scale insects and other insects as well, right? It's not just the lacquer and stuff. I mean, like you said, there's the color, the red pigmentation. I mean, there's so much stuff. What was the inspiration? Like what drove you to write the Insect Epiphany? This book, this monstrous book that covers so many things.
Well, honestly, so I've been interested in insects since I was that big, about that big right there.
Yep.
And then interested in our connections culturally when I was a little bit bigger, right? But it took a while before I really started to explore our connections with insects in art, as well as in literature, Kafka's The Metamorphosis, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, the list goes on.
Yep.
And Timber Press, about 5-6 years ago, reached out to me, said, hey, we saw you give a talk on cultural entomology. Would you be interested in writing a book? Because we think we should have a book on cultural entomology. And that paved the way for me to start thinking about, how would I write such a book? How would I lay it out? How would I tell the stories? What framework would be worthwhile? Because it would be impossible. I mean, the book is somewhat hefty, but imagine trying to write a comprehensive tome on how insects have affected human history and culture.
That would
impossible,
never end. It's impossible. Yeah,
exactly. So I went with the stories that most intrigued me, thinking about, for example, how we exploit or use insect products and insects, how we, if don't use them directly, build them or imitate them, or how we might benefit from imitating them. So really the inspiration was looking at all the little collections and articles and resources that I'd gathered over the years, thinking, wow, this would be a great foray, a great venue to consolidate and explore them in a way that I could share my excitement to potentially excite others to celebrate insects, maybe beyond the ecosystem services they perform, with the cultural services they perform, and to surprise readers and open their eyes to all the hidden ways that insects affect our lives. So really, that spurred me on.
Yeah, it's perfect, because it really is, you know, and I like to do the same thing with my podcast episodes when I can. Now, some of these insects and things like that I cover are so specific that it's like, it's hard to find any like cultural, like super folklore-y stuff, because some of them are just unexplored or just largely left. But
honestly, that is also a really good talking point, because we have 1.1 million described and so many unknown, undescribed species. Since we have such a rich relationship with, say, hundreds, thousands of insects, what about the others? How do they affect us? For example, how many unknown insects pollinate chocolate or cacao from which we derive chocolate, right? There's 1,611 species of insects conservatively that we traditionally consume. How many others do we consume, right? Purposefully, right?
Right.
And how many cultures, haven't noted, described in any kind of scholarly way how
That's
they
the
use
thing,
their
right?
insects.
Because I am sure that there are tons of anecdotes, tons of like pieces of, culture and history for some of these things that are just not made publicly available, that are either just like not translated out of the original language, but are also just like you said, not put into literature, not made, scientifically available for a broader audience.
That's right.
And they just kind of get lost. And the only way to find them is to actually go and be part of that culture, to figure it out. But the thing is that it's like we don't know what we're looking for, right? So somebody has to just go to some obscure place for the intention of discovering anything.
I'll do it. So, but picture this, Mitch. I mean, you're talking about other Homo sapiens on the planet. Now jump to a non-human primate. And on page 113, I have what? A picture of a chimpanzee staring at their hands. So what is this chimpanzee staring at? Apparently, an insect that has just recently been described that the chimpanzee has been using as a medicinal, say for himself or for fellow members of their troop. So how many insects are used not just as food, but as medicinals in non-human animals?
Absolutely. And I totally covered this in one of my episodes, actually. And I can't remember which one it was, but it was talking about primates using a crushed insect to like rub on their backs and to rub on parts to kind of help. Is this
in this case they actually bite and place it on wounds.
Yeah, there we go. Yes.
And it is a winged insect. And so I've been communicating with the people who conduct this research in Africa in order to attain that image that's in the book and to learn more about it. And the funny thing was, I said, hey, do you have an entomologist on the team? Do you want me to help describe whatever insect that is? And they said, actually, we're on it. And a publication is in preparation where this mystery insect will be revealed to the world.
Okay. Because so this might be a different scenario then, because I do believe the one that I covered was identified.
Wow.
Yes, they used, what was it? I want to say it was like a stink bug or some kind of insect that had this
now, are
nasty
you talking about
odor.
And this is just cosmetic to attract mates, right? Something like that, not to heal wounds. And if so, I'd love to learn about that. That should be in the Insect Epiphany, Volume 2.
Okay, Volume 2. No, there was something that they used, and it was like medicinal. I gotta look through. This was like a while ago.
Please.
I gotta go back and
I would love that resource if you come upon that.
Yeah, I will certainly go back and figure that out. But it's true. Like what you're saying is, we got to look at this outside of a scope of Homo sapiens, right?
Yeah.
Like, because there's so many other animals using insects for various things that have not been documented simply because we're not made aware, or we don't share the same language. So it's going to take like a lot more time.
And think about the utilitarian aspect of that too. If another primate species is benefiting from, say, the chemical makeup of an insect used to remedy a wound, hey,
yeah,
are these properties we could synthesize for ourselves?
Totally.
And on that note, I better feed dinner to my son.
Yeah. All right.
I'm getting hungry here, Mitch.
Yeah, and I got to start preparing to go to work. So
really fun talking with you about insects.
Yes, this was great. This was fantastic. Definitely, I would love to do it again sometime.
That'd be great.
And I will for sure get back to you on some of these things. I'm
cool.
on the morning cloak duty.
You sure are.
and I'll try to take a look at what the other primate was using.
Okay.
And I will certainly email and get back to you about these things.
Great.
Yeah, great. Fantastic. Is there anything you want to plug aside from your awesome book, The Insect Epiphany? Is there anything else you're looking to plug for the audience of the Insects for Fun podcast?
Yes. I want to plug entomophilia, the love of insects. And
there we go.
People can look up what I do scientifically, entomo art-wise, at pupating, pupating.org.
Beautiful. Fantastic. All right. Well, great, Barrett. This has been awesome. I'm really glad we had the opportunity to chat and talk about so many nerdy insect-related things.
You know it. Thank you so much, Mitch.
And hopefully I'll keep in touch.
That'd be great. And I hope your sinus Barrett feels better.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I do believe it's getting better. I think I'm on the mend. Working on it. So thank you.
Cool. All right.
And that's going to conclude today's special episode. But a lot of the things I mentioned earlier with delight traps and insect collection stories have all been recorded in vlog format, including me actually making those dollar store blacklight traps. I have so many vlogs with incredible footage over at patreon.com. And again, the entire conversation along with video of this chat can also be found over there as well. Thank you all for listening, and I will try not to keep you waiting too long for more new episodes.